should move on then to the first of them, Shane.
Yeah.
Shane has some presentation material.
Where do I start with that?
Seppuku?
Yeah. This one works, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I've got a few slides because I think some of the imagery is useful because in the context of what we've been talking about, this personalised city, the one the subject I've been exploring. So let me, and excuse me if I skip through some of these because I think I'd rather have the discussion. But you know, and just to start though, I think it's interesting that you know, us and them conversation that sort of Volker set out, and it's, I know Adam very well, and Adam Greenfield, who's criticising this, and there are others. Your ex-colleague Dan Hill is very active in this and saying it's about people. Well, yeah, it is. You know, we can't argue with that. Yeah, so we've got security issues. You know, and our industry it's big business, and I think it has a legitimate role. That technology is an undoubted trend, and anybody who doesn't think that that's a good thing, I think is sort of is a positive to our society. Is sort of it's not, you know, it's missing the point. Where have we had most resonance? You know, it is about dealing with cities are very. So you're trying to sell to, you know, the commercial deal to a customer. How do you do that in a complex city like London? And where we have had most traction, I think, is in some of those new developments in the Middle East, in Asia, and you can deal with a known entity like a developer, and that's fine. But maybe the expectations, the pitches that have come out from companies like mine and others have set the tone that we are proposing these Uber systems, and I think some of that is conception of a vision, and the reality is that certainly from our side, you know, about the networking layer, it's not our business, you know, but a connected society of which we think we play a role in is of everybody's interest, that everybody can play in that space. So I just want to go through a few, and actually this is a start from this quote which I brought up yesterday, a guy called Zef Hemmel who runs the Department for Physical Planning in Amsterdam, and you know, and he talks about the Wiki City and how he engages the people of Amsterdam. I won't read it out, but you know, the top bit, engineering invitation and implementing experience. They're doing that in that city. It's in a very functional part of the city and the planning process. And he goes around the world advocating this approach to his peers in different cities, but and he's doing it in his own. But just set out a few trends. You know, big data. You know, it's opening public information. But the peer production, open innovation is really where the personalizing city, where we can actually contribute and participate actively in our cities in a digital age. Design I'll come on to actually, and some of the examples of that. But you know, the acceptance of technology and that is enhancing to our lives. You know, things that feel good, tactile, are appropriate to the way we want to live. Are you know, seem to be. It is an area that, you know, we've been exploring in some of the service design as much as product design, and actually networked placemaking. Our the information flows. We can get a better sense of our local environment and some of the latent data that has never really been revealed, and that we can tap into that, whether that's through opening up data or through sensors and the broader Internet of Things. And you know, it can enhance our sense of our locality. But a lot of that is predicated on trust, really, and you know that you know, we would only participate and engage if we have if a sense of trust and community is engendered. I want to skip to some of the examples And you get some funny headlines that come out, and I saw this one. This was a few months ago, early in the summer, about the smart meter rollout, and you get some sensationalist headlines from the Daily Mail saying about the Big Brother can turn off your fridge, which is the scaremongering around about what the other side of big data and a networked age, and similar thing, the too smart city. I mean, actually, if you read this, it seems crazy. It's green, wired, even helpful, and do we really want to live there? Well, yeah, we do, absolutely. Why wouldn't we? This is happening, and I ran through some of these yesterday, and I think that we're about on this fifth stage. There's lots of data is out there. We're networked, we have digital public services, and we're able to be mobile. And it's really about making use of that, and I think we're just at such an early stage in that evolution. What came up earlier about the city of Chicago and what you're developing there, wanted to highlight that we see that there's this technocratic push from a technology company that is not really what any of us believe, and so engaging with wider community groups, like with the University of Chicago, with the Southside neighbourhoods there, working with the Young Foundation, a social innovation group here in the UK, I would help to redress that balance a bit. And design, of course, the Nest, which talked about as an example of a good design, new way of engaging with technology. Is very powerful. But then there's a downside, and I found the image earlier because this came up in London, just around Cheapside, on the corner around the Bank of England. I've seen it myself, and I thought, what's this? There's these bins, these interactive bins, and it turns out they were doing a trial, and the Corporation of London didn't realise that what was actually happening in this trial, which was that they were getting the MAC addresses of everybody walking by, and this has now been, as I understand it, reported to the Information Commissioner. But it's the company involved will say, look, it's anonymised and that's fine. But it's an example of perhaps a good idea can go really awry and helps push back on that any level of trust that you may have been having around about how using digital services But there are others that are seemingly working. There's a small business called City 24/7 that we've worked with in New York, but their ambitions are nationwide in the US, but probably global, around getting the information, advertising on the street, using the street furniture, and looking at how that can be networked. Another way that our cities, our physical hard infrastructure, can become more interactive. And we've written a number of case studies about what we've been doing around, from South Korea to Nice, where we've worked with some of the little Internet of Things companies, putting sensors in pavements, around smart parking schemes in the case of Nice. But, in South Korea, they've looked about how the city can play a role in engendering entrepreneurship, using the data, in New York, in Amsterdam, for example, and open data is happening, and particularly in London, I think we've got some great examples of how that is being applied. But that's not to ignore the point that I think that it has a fundamental problem about data quality and how some of that, how that data can really be used, and the business models for those where the data is coming from, and for those that are trying to make use of it. But there's a whole array of wider ways that we can get data, and these are a part of the Tech Cities development in East London, a company called Trampoline Systems, a great Shoreditch startup business. It was like a social media. They do social media analysis for organisations and sort of personal interactions, and anthropological tool, and they've applied that to the whole Shoreditch area and mapped Twitter feeds and the interactions across that community. To change gear a bit, actually, it comes back to some of the things. What is a city? I went to a really interesting session early this year about are garden cities relevant in the 21st century? And not on the left here, not perhaps in the way that Ebenezer Howard originally conceived it, but in terms of the networked, distributed way, and on the top right here is Paul Baran's original drawing for what the internet should look like. It is incredibly relevant, in fact. In fact, we are living more distributed lives, and technology enables us to not have to go to the center of cities. And we can make choices about where we work and live and interact physically and digitally. So a digital garden city, to me, somehow has some legs. And that's shown here. The source of this, but I don't think they originally did this. But and Mike, I think you showed yesterday actually the broader national one, and I've seen Alan Baxter from Alan Baxter Associates talk about actually the whole of the UK being a urban area, and how we can then look at how our services, our transport services, need to reflect that. They certainly don't at the moment, and some of the very expensive new infrastructures probably don't even recognise this. But this is what's going on, and we are somehow making do. And so a network city is a very different one from a political city. This great imagery here, and we do come in from the suburbs and from further afar. Why do we go to the water in the 21st century? Why do we go to work, to compute, if you will? We don't need to do that. And there are many examples about cities and regions and countries around the world that are exploring this in a different way. In France, they've been getting this, and they're exploring a national smart work network. In South Korea, likewise, it's part of their national green growth strategy. For us, it started with the city of Amsterdam and their interest about their, really quite acute congestion issues, and how they could tap into providing better ways for their employees, but citizens in the city to work. And so and really this written on the back of a phenomenon around the world of the co-working, people working in third spaces, and it goes on and on. There are so many examples of this, the future of work and the applications of technology. And this is how somehow whatever the political design of a city is, actually we're individually in our organisations and in our communities, we're going about it in the ways that fit our personal lifestyles, and we're afforded that luxury today like no other time. Some cities, I cite two here, Amsterdam and Helsinki, that I think have been excellent in terms of how the public administration can get involved and get it and work with a broad array of stakeholders, academics to businesses like us and small businesses and NGOs and themselves, in really exploring what can be done. And it's certainly helped those cities in terms of their branding as well. Amsterdam is one of those cities known to be a smart city. Now they themselves would say they don't have a grand plan for this. But just many small things make up a bigger whole, and it's a great place to do these projects. It's a very sort of open environment to experiment, and there are many other cities that also have that sort of open approach to new approaches to what they do. I'll miss the whole stakeholder thing. We had covered this actually in these discussions. No, I'm just going to close off because some of the issues that we bumped up against here, and technology only at the end really is what does a technology architecture look like? We can have broadband, but there are many other types of technology, right? And that's got to be a good thing. But what are the different economics? What are the types of public-private partnerships? Sort of as a service, consumption economics is a hot topic we hear around the world, but it's really and also about the experiences of what public services can look like, and engagement. How can we, Yuri made the point earlier about the question they've encountered around the world is, how can we get people involved with what we're doing? These are things that are universal, we're hearing around the world, and so that's where, as a company, we are really the technology is there, and great engineers are able to get things to work together. But some of the more profound things are about new economic models, how you can engender partnerships with different local, global stakeholders, and get people involved in those. And just to close, one of the first one, there's a DNA of every project we've been in that there has to be somebody that has some strong leadership that can break through some of the silos, has a direction, and that's usually, not always the case, but a good mayor that has some vision for where he wants to go, or she wants to go, but more. And there are different ways of looking at that. It could be that you're in the right part of a political cycle, and that's an interesting perspective on when you're dealing with cities. That a new administration would want to be doing new things, and you can engage in a much more open relationship then. So yeah, that's where I'll leave it for now.
Good, thank you very much. Shane, questions for Shane? Certainly one observation you had in there that I like very much, and we touched on it yesterday, is this, actually quite early yesterday, is this notion that the topology of a network city may be very different from the topology of the physical city, and that we haven't really begun to internalize that yet, how it changes our sense of place. Volker, shame you weren't with us for that debate. It was a very good part of the quality of life discussion yesterday.
And that's, but I get the point about density, as well, the economies of scale. But if we look at what we're doing personally, it tells us something different. We are all over the place, and not just living in our dense cities. So how do we respond to that?
Well, I was going to take up the point that Rick made yesterday about people in Birmingham who took his potential clients, was it up to the top of Leaky Hills or something, and looked down and could see the wonderful countryside of the West Midlands or whatever. And just thinking about what you're saying about Amsterdam, I mean, before we had the internet of everything, and before we had the internet, if I dare go back to that time, people wanted to live in Amsterdam because it was a compact, quiet, cycle-friendly city where you get drugs free, or at least legally. It was extraordinarily well connected in terms of infrastructure and getting to the airport. We had many people living in Amsterdam and working all over the world, especially in London. So I'm not really convinced, actually, that Amsterdam is perhaps, I'm sure it's gained something for becoming a smart city, but, or a smart work area. But I'm afraid to say, I think a lot of those plus points which attract people today are ones that have been there for a lot longer.
Actually, I think Amsterdam has been really clever. Amsterdam and Barcelona is another city. Be interesting to see if you start to look at the how much has changed with regard to the investment in technologies actually on the ground in Amsterdam. It is, I'm not sure it's that material compared to what Chicago, for example, has done, or other cities have done. But they have latched onto this idea that because it's a cool place and it's a great place, that it could become a focal point for the debate around smart cities by doing a few interesting projects. And I think for 2 or 3 years, or maybe it's a bit longer, that was enough to be a leading smart city. I think in the next 3 or 4 years, this will again radically change, and there will be a new phase of first movers who see this as a transformational intervention and invest in the use of technology very differently, and they will roll out services and do things completely different. And the problem for Amsterdam and other cities will then be, if they haven't done that, I think then being a really cool place will bring back the tourists who like that, but they won't bring in the start-up businesses, the technology clusters that people want to create. And I think it was the LSE who did a Electric City report here in London that showed the tech cluster was the only cluster that in the recession didn't shrink and that maintained jobs, so basically it produced jobs while everybody else was shedding jobs. So the competition for technology investment and technology companies to create jobs, I think, would be a huge factor in the way cities address that, and cities who don't really act but have a cool brand, there won't be enough.
Yeah, you certainly have to do something, and yeah, my favourite example at the moment is, and Rick knows this, is up in Bradford, right, which makes no noise whatsoever about being a smart city, don't do anything branding like this, but somehow, as part, it's a city that in a post-industrial era sort of lost between Manchester and Leeds, and has a problem with its sense of place. And there's a shopping centre-sized hole in the middle of the city centre, and that is fortunately now being developed. But they had someone in the council had the foresight to look at reshaping the city centre, and they created the city park, and right in the middle of the centre, and it's a very shallow pool of water, in fact, that can be drained away pretty quickly, and people can walk across it, but they put water jets in it and lighting, and what it is, it's and a friend that you know that Usman Hack got involved with this, and he created this software platform that it enables the lighting and the water to interact with as people go across this civic space, and so they're interacting with it, whether it's been known to them or not, and there's no sort of we're just looking at, well, maybe there's a bit of this, they're looking at footfall and how people are using it, and then they can adapt it for that, but it's actually, most of it is about a sense of fun. This is a fun place to sort of hang around, and there was a lot of skepticism in Bradford. It's real projects like that are fundamentally part of rebranding that place that had an issue to address, and technology there in a very simple way, in fact, is doing some of that role, and I think it's a really interesting project.
All right, let's